This is draft season. We're here in Mobile, Alabama, just before the final day of practice between the American and national teams. John Schmeelk, Tony Pauline with you. We'll give you a little bit of a shorter episode today, and then we'll recap the games and everything last week, and we'll talk about some Shrine Bowl practices that Tony was at in Las Vegas as well. Hope you guys are doing well out there. It's been fun down here so far. We had the first day here was about 85 degrees and sunny, where 90% of the very pale folk attending this all got sunburned, including me. It was not fun. And then we were back to our normal rainy, cloudy, and general, dreariness in the, 60s with a little bit of rain. But that's what we're used to in Mobile, so that was good. Tony, it's good to see you, man. I guess we can start here with Shrine, right? You were in Vegas before you got here to Mobile. I haven't had a chance to watch any of the practice tape yet, so we're going to rely on you here. What did you see at Shrine that really jumped out at you?
Well, I think the first thing is the best quarterback in any of these games was at the Shrine Bowl, and that was Aiden O'Connell of Purdue. I mean, because, we'll probably talk about the Senior Bowl quarterbacks, but Aiden O'Connell played relatively well. Didn't have the knockout week that I was expecting or I'd hoped, but he established himself as a leader, and he's got a big-time arm. I think when you look at it, there were three cornerbacks who really stood out at Shrine game practice. Miles Brook of Louisiana Tech, Terrell Smith of Minnesota, Catrell Clark of Louisville. Catrell Clark was phenomenal. One of the receivers who did well last week was A.T. Perry of Wake Forest. Catrell Clark was the only cornerback who could stop A.T. Perry. He was making plays in man. He was making plays backed off the line of scrimmage, and he made plays each day, all 3 days of practice. So I think Catrell Clark really left the Shrine game with an improved draft grade. Terrell Smith is somebody who wasn't even on the scouts' radar prior to the season. He's a track and field athlete who was developing into a cornerback, and as the week went on, he progressed, and I think he leaves with improved draft grades. Miles Brook of Louisiana Tech, I had been writing about him since October. He was good all week long. I mean, from the first day of practice through the last day, he was making plays, and he showed a lot of leadership too. I mean, he was out there really cheering on his teammates, helping guys, so that worked. So I think those three cornerbacks really stood out. Some offensive players as well. Some offensive players as well. I mean, Demario Douglas, the small wide receiver from Liberty. Everybody was talking about Zay Flowers, and Zay Flowers, from the receiver from Boston College, practiced 1 day. Demario Douglas practiced 3 days, and nobody could cover him. I mean, he ran quick, precise, sharp routes where he separated from opponents. He had a burst of speed. He was basically a poor man's version of Zay Flowers. And I think Demario Douglas is from Liberty is a guy who left the Shrine game with really improved draft grades.
You mentioned Flowers only practiced 1 day. In the 1 day of practice, what'd you see from him?
He was good. And even that 1 day of practice, he didn't take reps all the time. I mean, he was sparingly taking reps. But when he was at the line of scrimmage, nobody could cover him. I mean, his route running is crisp and sharp, and he separates. He catches the ball very well. He was out at practice all 3 days, but he was only dressed for practice for 1 day. Showed a decent burst of speed. He knows he's got it going on. There's no doubt about it. You could see that he's confident and that he's looking forward to the next level. And I think part of the value of being there is the fact that all 32 teams on hand got to interview him.
Yeah, no question about it. Very valuable. Some people have projected him as a first-round pick, which I think in a normal wide receiver year, a guy at that size, I think he measured, 5'9", 180, something like that, right? I feel like that's not typical. So just what's your thoughts on him as an overall prospect and kind of where he would fit in this class, and also in a normal wide receiver year?
Well, I think a lot will depend on how he runs at the Combine and his testing marks at the Combine. I interviewed him, and he told me he expects to run in the 4.3s. Now, I would agree with you in the sense that if you go in the past three receiver drafts, he's probably a early to mid-second round choice. But the receiver position is up for grabs now. You got Quentin Johnston of TCU, who is a big, athletic, athlete at the receiver position, but he's not polished. And then you have Jordan Addison and Zay Flowers, who are very polished at their craft. So it's a matter of, Zay Flowers, he's going to have limitations because of his size and the scheme. If he's a good fit for your system, you may consider taking him at the bottom half of round 1.
Interesting. And we'll obviously talk more about the wide receivers as we go along here. Anyone else from Shrine, Tony, that you want to mention before we jump over to the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, Anthony Orji was a linebacker from Vanderbilt. I mean, he looks the part. He's a big, stout guy, and he played very well. Deshaun Johnson of Toledo is a guy that we talked about with Eric Galko when we did the preview of this game. Some of the offensive linemen told me that he was the toughest guy to block all week because he's so quick and he's explosive. Casimir Allen, the running back from UCLA, a smaller guy, but he was sort of like the receiver version of Zay Flowers, if you will, because he's so quick. He's got such great footwork. He was able to make defenders miss, bounce around piles. A lot of teams don't know what position Casimir Allen's going to play at the next level, and he played running back most of the week, but he also took some reps at the receiver spot because some teams project him as a receiver, also a good return specialist, so I think he helped himself.
And obviously, the Shrine game is being played on Thursday night. That's a little bit later today, the day we're recording. You could be listening to this potentially after the Shrine game has been played. We will review the Shrine game itself and the Senior Bowl game itself on next week's episode, but we're going to talk about the practices a little bit this week. All right, Tony, let's jump over to the Senior Bowl here in Mobile. And we were just talking about the wide receivers and Zay Flowers, so I guess we can start there. Who are some of the guys there that really jumped out at you? I know Nathaniel Dell was a guy that you were a big fan of. I thought Jaden Reed out of Michigan State had a really nice week too. Talk about those guys and anyone else at wide receiver that you think really helped themselves.
Well, we talk about Zay Flowers and Shrine and his projection. I mean, no one's been able to cover Tank Reed this week, Nathaniel Dell. No one's been able to cover, I'm all over the place. No one's been able to cover Nathaniel Tank Dell this week. I mean, from day one, they can't cover him in or out of routes. When he's open and when he's in space, he's got a burst of speed. He's constantly taking it downfield. He's done a great job catching the ball. He was good on Tuesday. He was better on Wednesday. I think the only blip in his game was they had him return punts, and he dropped the 2 punts that he was supposed to field. That was the only bad portion. But, as I put it on Twitter yesterday, nobody has been able to cover Tank Dell here.
Yeah, and just to bring up so fans understand, Nathaniel Tank Dell out of Houston, wide receiver, just 5'8" and 163 pounds. We talked about Zay Jones's size. Well, 163, that's going to raise a lot of big red flags for some NFL teams.
It will, but the fact is this, you got to put him in a system where you line him up in the slot, you back him up off the line of scrimmage, you get him off of press coverage, and if he gets a running start on defenders, he's going to be tough to cover. Now, you don't want to put him in traffic because he's going to get pounded. But, listen, I mean, we're in a day and age where, quarterbacks that are 6 foot or maybe 5'11 and a half are going with the first pick of the draft. And 10 years ago, you never would have thought that's possible. And it's not so much about the 6'4" receiver anymore. It's about the guy that can get separation through his routes, which is what Dell does.
Yeah, why don't we stick with the American team since you're on Dell here. Dontavian Wicks, Tony, a guy that made a couple of wow plays and a couple other times had trouble getting open, to be quite honest with you. A couple of the guys, I thought Rashee Rice had a nice first day. The second day I went back and I rewatched the one-on-ones. The guys were holding him left and right, and he just had trouble separating, but I don't think it was his fault because he was just getting grabbed. They kept pulling his jersey at that wide receiver spot. And then Xavier Hutchinson, and I think what we knew about Xavier Hutchinson coming into this, Tony, is kind of what we've seen. He's a crafty wide receiver. He's got good length. He's got good hands. But that burst and pull-away speed, I'm not sure you see that on a consistent play-by-play basis.
Because he doesn't have it. I mean, he's not going to go to the combine and run the 4.3 like Zay Flowers is saying he's going to do. But, he knows how to get open, and he gets consistently catches the ball. You mentioned Dontavian Wicks of Virginia, and I agree with you. I mean, there were some times where you're like, wow, if he could do that consistently, this guy is a day 2 pick. But that's his MO. I mean, that's what it was last year at Virginia. They had quarterback issues there, but he was never consistently productive. I do think that we've seen some good things from the hometown guy, Jalen Wayne here, who has made a lot of nice receptions. More of your Xavier Hutchinson type of intermediate possession receiver, not a guy that's going to stretch the field, but a guy that gets up and competes to come away with the reception.
Yeah, he did make a couple plays. I also bring up a local guy, Andre Yeshivas out of Princeton. He showed pull-away speed. The one thing that kind of stuck with me, though, I watched some of his get-offs at the line of scrimmage. His acceleration's not great. I feel like he's one of these build-up guys that needs a little bit of a runway to get to that full speed.
Or he needs to learn to do it because he was a 60-meter champion, indoor track and field champion. He's actually a heptathlete and a decathlon guy. I spoke with his dad at length yesterday. We talked about his athletic history, getting into the decathlon and then moving to football. I think with him, it's just a matter of learning to use that speed. He's got to get off the line quicker. He's got to basically come out of the blocks quick as he would in the 60 meters, and he's got to become a much better route runner.
Yeah, 100%. Let's jump to the national team, Tony. I didn't think you had quite the group of wide receivers on the national team as we did on the American team. Ronnie Bell out of Michigan had some moments, but I don't think anything that really necessarily wows you. Elijah Higgins, he's 228. A lot of NFL teams see him as a move tight end. We talked about that with Jim Nagy in our preview of the Senior Bowl last week. And, nobody at wide receiver to me for the national team really kind of jumped out, though Jaden Reed was somebody I wasn't that familiar with from Michigan State. He's 5'10", 191. I thought of all the guys on this roster, I thought he was separating pretty consistently, could win across the field, get in and out of his breaks well, could win over the top. I thought he really did well for himself out of Michigan State.
And I believe the data showed that he was one of the fastest, if not the fastest receiver on the field, which is surprising because you would have thought it was Tank Dell. But yeah, Reed he looks like the finished product. He looks like the polished receiver. Ran good routes, consistently caught the ball, plays with excellent balance and body control. He tracks the pass in the air, got vertical, and was able to contort and use the sidelines well to come away with the reception. I think Michael Wilson of Stanford has also had a lot of good moments here. Really good route runner. I mean, not Tank Dell, but close to Jaden Reed in that he separates from routes. And, everybody likes to talk about the receiver that runs the 4.3s. NFL teams here want to see those guys that can run those routes and get separation through the routes because that's just as important because you're not consistently throwing the ball 30, 40 yards down the field in the NFL as compared to the number of times you're running 8-yard routes or 6-yard routes or 10-yard routes, and you need to separate from defenders, and that's what Jaden Reed and Michael Wilson have been able to do the past 2 days.
All right, let's jump over here and now talk a little bit about the cornerbacks. These are the guys trying to cover these wide receivers. And obviously, these one-on-ones is not an ideal position for these cornerbacks to be in. It's very difficult. You have two-way goes usually, and it's just very difficult for these guys to stay with them with all that open field and no help over the top, which often is not the case when you're playing corner in the National Football League or in college for that matter. So I'll bring a couple guys from the national team. We'll start there first, Tony. I thought Kyle Blue Kelly out of Stanford's played well. He had an interception. He jumped a couple routes, came up with one pick, 6'1", 193 out of Stanford. Riley Moss, we talked about him last week with Jim Nagy, 6 foot 192. He showed his speed. I think he tracked as the fastest cornerback, or at least on one of the days at practice. I thought he had very good coverage, especially on go routes down the sideline. And for the national team, those are really the two guys to me that jumped out jumped out a lot because of their play.
Well, first, Kai Blue Kelly of Stanford, it's kind of ironic because when I watched him in drills and the one-on-ones, he was getting torched. It was during scrimmage where he really stood out. I believe he had 2 interceptions in 7-on-7 in full scrimmage, and there are a lot of people in the league that like him. I know that we're talking about corners. I'm going to throw some safeties in here. And Sidney Brown of Illinois was out of sight. I mean, Sidney Brown showed cornerback-type ball skills yesterday. Sidney Brown, if you watch him from Illinois, he's a fun guy to watch because he's a smaller guy at 5'10", but he flies around the field and he basically sacrifices his body to make the tackle. Yesterday, we saw outstanding ball skills from Sidney Brown in one-on-ones. He looked like he would not be a liability if you line him up over the slot receiver. And that's worth its weight in gold here. I mean, if you can show cover skills like that in one-on-ones here, and you're a safety, because the safeties are usually getting torched in those one-on-one drills, Sidney Brown looked like, he was a natural at it, so he really helped himself.
Yeah, and I think we saw the same, and I'll jump to the American team now, Tony. Christopher Smith out of Georgia. He's a safety. He's only 5'10", 188, so you expect he has really good movement skills, and he did. The first day he was doing one-on-ones against tight ends and running backs, and they had no chance against him. And then he lined up against wide receivers on Wednesday on day 2, and I thought he did a really good job covering them as well. Jamie Robinson, the safety out of Florida State, same deal. He covered some wide receivers on day 2 of practice at 5'10", 194. And those are two guys where, you have that kind of star position now in the NFL now. It's kind of come up from college a little bit, where the safety that's also going to kind of play cover corner for you and step up in the slot. I think those two guys really fit that bill well.
Yeah, Smith is one of my Smith is one of my favorite DBs. I've thought all along he's very underrated. He's a good run defender. He showed good ball skills the past 2 years. He showed them here. I think when it comes to Christopher Smith of Georgia, it's going to come down to his 40 time, how fast he runs. Can he get in the high 4.4s, the low 4.5s? He needs to do that. You know, we talked about Dontavian Wicks and the inconsistency. If there was a Dontavian Wicks at the defensive back spot, it's Tyreek Stevenson of Miami, because there are times he looks very impressive. He's long, he's athletic, he's lean, he's explosive, and occasionally he makes some outstanding plays. But as you've said the past couple days in practice, his technique is all over the place, and it gets very sloppy. And then there are times when he should make plays, he gets beat, and you wonder, what's going on.
Yeah, and I'll throw a couple of the guys out, too. I thought Julius Brents had a great first day, and I thought yesterday I went back and I rewatched the one-on-ones. He had a couple of rough reps on Wednesday, so I want to see how he bounces back in practice today. But he's 6'3", he's got good movement skills. I think teams are going to fall in love with his traits a lot. And then a guy that I wasn't familiar with, Tony, before we got here is Darius Rush, the defensive back out of South Carolina. He had an interception over the course of the first 2 days, and I thought he's frankly covered pretty well in those tough one-on-one situations as well.
Yeah, he has. He's had his moments. I also like what Chamari Connor of Virginia Tech has done at times. I mean, Virginia Tech, the program's been down the past couple of years, but he's had a few situations, a few plays in both one-on-ones and scrimmage where Connor of Virginia Tech, Chamari Connor, stood out. He's got real good size, 6 foot, 205 pounds. You mentioned Julius Brents, and that's his game. I mean, he is a long, athletic, physical corner that's going to blow people away at the combine. He looks great on the hoof. There are times when he's able to shut down opponents, but as we saw a couple times yesterday, even in the Big 12 title game, there are other times where he's getting torched. So, he's a good athlete who really has to develop into a full-time cornerback.
All right, let's kind of move from the smaller guys now to the bigger guys. We'll get to the guys up front last. Let's talk a little bit about the running backs here, because I thought this was a really good running back group, Tony. Roschon Johnson, unfortunately, he had to leave after the first day of practice with a hand injury. 6 foot, 225. He showed his power, his ability to run the football. I thought he looked really good when he had a chance. Chase Brown, 5'9", 215. I thought he did a really nice job showing off his ability. And again, it's really tough with running backs here. But I thought the two guys on the American team were the ones that really stood out to me, and you can bring up any of these guys you want. Kenny McIntosh out of Georgia, he left the first practice with a cramp, came back second day, looked great. Route running was excellent, had a big run up the middle. And then for me, the star, I think maybe the guy that's impressed me the most has been Tyjae Spears. Like we know from the film what he can do, but to see it up close and personal, the quickness, the burst, the pull-away speed, throw on top of that division, he just gets through the line really quick. I think Tyjae Spears, has secured himself as a at worst early third round, probably second round pick. And if he's in a timeshare, he's going to be a really explosive player on the next level.
Yeah, you look at his hand size too, 10-inch hands, and he's a good receiver out of the backfield. Those 10-inch hands make catching the ball very easy. Listen, Tyjae Spears has proven he's the real deal. It's not that he was playing in the American Athletic Conference and he was beating up on lesser competition. Because you mentioned the burst, the quickness, and speed. I also love the vision, the patience. He's not a guy that just takes off upfield. You could see him, when the ball's handed off for him, he's waiting for his blocks to develop. He's finding the hole. As I said, he's a shorter guy at 5'9.5", and what happens is sometimes he gets lost behind his lineman, and he runs with great technique. He runs with good lean, as they say. He runs behind his pads, which when he gets tackled, he falls forward. But yeah, Tyjae Spears has definitely proven that he is the real deal while he's here. There was one other running back. I've seen Evan Hull of Northwestern has had his moments here. He would huge production at Northwestern. Another smart guy. He's a little bit bigger, 214 pounds, but he sees the hole and he gets through it with authority. I thought he's done well.
Yeah, I thought Eric Gray, too, from Oklahoma, had a couple nice runs, too. And the one guy Tajay Spears reminds me a little bit of, I don't think he is quite as the power as the running back last year out of Michigan State, who was kind of also low to the ground, similar build. I think they have a couple things that might be in common there. Those Spears, as you mentioned, a better receiver. Tight ends, Tony, I'll go with Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State, 6'5", 255. Jim Nagy mentioned last week he thought he'd be a big riser. This is really the first football he's played. He's been rehabbing a knee injury he suffered back in September, and I do think we see some rust there in terms of what he's trying to do. But the size, the ability to separate, I mean, you see all the traits you want out of one of these big-time tight ends.
Another guy with big hands, 10.5-inch hands, and that's something to look at. He's also got 32.5-inch long arms, which is good for a tight end. But, you mentioned he hasn't played a lot of football this year because he was injured, and there were a couple of people who said to me, yeah, he looks good, but the fact is he looks like he's injured. And I think the fact that, you see so many guys pull out of these games, and here's Luke Musgrave obviously performing under 100%, but he wants to perform, and he's performing well. I mean, you can see this guy's an athlete, and I've been told he's going to blow up the combine at the tight end position. And let's go back to what we talked about. There are some people who believe that Michael Mayer of Notre Dame won't be the first tight end taken. It could be Luke Musgrave. I think that Jim Nagy also told us that when we spoke to him. And Musgrave has shown a lot of ability this week and a lot of toughness.
Yeah, and I talked to Musgrave, and he said, look, I've just been dying to play football. I wanted to go out there and play. That's why he works hard to get back. To your point, Tony, it shows that he really loves the game. Any other tight ends? I know you were watching the tight end out of Miami, Mallory, I think, as well as some other guys.
Yeah, Mallory's been up and down. I mean, he's a try-hard guy, but he's dropped a few passes where he should have caught him. I think Davis Allen of Clemson has caught the ball really well. I mean, he's not a downfield tight end. He's your traditional three-down blocker, intermediate pass catcher. I watched Payne Durham yesterday, and he was dominant in blocking drills. I mean, he would stun the opponents, the linebackers, and you could see they had to shake it off after they got pounded by Durham. And he catches the ball well. The only thing is he's a guy who's probably going to run 4.85. So he's a number 2, number 3 tight end at the next level. He's not going to get down the field 25, 30 yards on a consistent basis, which is what the teams want these days, which means he's going to be a later round pick, but he'll probably have a 10-year career in the NFL.
All right, let's go to our off-ball linebackers, Tony. D. Winters had an interception the other day. He got matched up a couple times. I rewatched the one-on-ones today, one-on-one with Tajay Spears in coverage, and he stuck with him a couple times. I was really impressed by that, 5'10", 223, a little undersized, but I thought he showed really good movement skills throughout. Any other linebackers really jump out to you?
Yeah, Diane Henley of Washington State was outstanding. He's outstanding in coverage drills. He's staying downfield 25, 30 yards with running backs and tight ends, showing good ball skills, not just running down and face guarding these guys and getting his hands up crazy. No, he gets his hips around, he gets his head around, he tracks the pass in the air. I thought he's done very well. DeMarvion Overshore has shown things on occasion. Ivan Pace flashes ability, but he just can't finish the play, which is a little bit disappointing. Really haven't seen too much of Nick Hampton this week. It really hasn't stood out, which is a bit surprising because teams like him so much. Will McDonald, we talked about him with Jim Nagy beforehand. He's played both linebacker and defensive end. I think he's looked much better moving up the field than moving in reverse.
And by the way, Tony, I think he's been the best edge rusher out there.
Oh, he's the best athlete here without of those front guys. But the thing is, Will McDonald, 6'3.5", 241 pounds. How's he going to hold up against the run? So, incredibly athletic, long arms, 35-inch long arms. But again, he's got to add some more versatility to his game because he can't just rush wide angles on Sunday. That's not going to work.
All right, let's go to the edge rushers. I think McDonald's the perfect transition there, Tony. Isaiah Foskey, he's got back-to-back double-digit sack seasons. I like to see a guy like that has a lot of production and is a senior and has played a lot of football. I want to see him be dominant in a practice situation like this. I have not seen that. That's been a little bit disappointing for me. And then, you have a lot of these kind of tweener, smaller linebacker like Isaiah Land is one of these guys that has done a little bit in the edge, but even against bigger tackles, he has not really won on the edge consistently. I really think, for me at least, this has been a little bit of a disappointing defensive end edge class. I have not seen guys out there really dominating against some of these offensive tackles.
I think in part that's because the offensive tackles have actually played well here. So I think KJ Henry of Clemson, who kind of falls under the radar because Clemson has so much talent there, I think he's done very well. Keon White, although he's not a pure edge rusher of Georgia Tech, maybe we're talking about the defensive ends, I thought he's done well. But yeah, I mean, even the kid from Tennessee, Byron Young, he's been spotty. Ali Gay of LSU, really haven't seen him show up. Derek Hall of Auburn. I mean, they pretty much see Dylan Horton of TCU, I thought looked good defending the run. We know he's a pass rusher. We saw it during the season. We saw it against Michigan. And the question was, how's he going to hold up against the run? I saw him go up against a couple of really good, really big defensive tackles, able to hold his ground, slide off, and make plays against the run. But yeah, there's not been a lot of pass rush potential here or pass rush production here that teams would hope to see.
Yeah, Horton had a couple of rushes I thought on day one that were pretty good, but on day two he was quiet. And you mentioned White. I agree. I think he's been probably one of the better defensive ends in this group too. How about the guys inside?
Well, I think the guy who really stood out for me is someone who plays inside and outside, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name. That's the Northwestern kid. He's known as Tommy. Go ahead. If you want to say his name, good luck. I'm
going to give it a shot here. God bless me. I have not tried this at all. Adetomiwa Adebawore.
There you go. And I'll just call him Tommy because that's what they call him. He was projected to be 270 pounds. He came in at 284 pounds. He was unstoppable yesterday. I mean, there were a lot of plays where the crowd would react and you would look, and there he was making another play behind the line of scrimmage, or just defend, or just annihilating the opponent. And he has really helped himself here. I think the other guy that scouts are raving about, and he's constantly blowing past opponents snap after snap in one-on-ones as well as scrimmage is Keanu Benton of Wisconsin. I mean, he's been all over the place. He's explosive. He's athletic. He's annihilated one-on-one blocking. He had a bit of a disappointing senior season, and when I asked, what the situation was, I was told, well, the scheme at Wisconsin asked him to occupy the gaps rather than make plays. And here we are at the Senior Bowl. He's allowed to make plays, and he's gotten good production. He's getting good results. He has really helped himself. There are some people who say he could slide into the late first round. I don't think he's a first rounder, but it's not a great defensive tackle class. It's a priority position come NFL draft time. So it's one of those situations where, he could slide into the late part if a team 31, 32 is looking for a defensive tackle.
Yeah, and I think another guy, Redmond, the kid out of Oklahoma, he's a smaller defensive tackle. He's shown some good bursts getting up the field from time to time. But look, I think your point when I asked about the pass rushers is accurate. I think for the most part, and I think it's a credit to the group because they're at a disadvantage in these drills, I think the offensive linemen have come out on top in these one-on-ones. I think they've been better than the defensive linemen for the most part. So let's go there at offensive tackle, Tony. And, and actually, I'm going to start with the versatile guys because I think, we've seen Jim Nagy and these two coaching staffs do a great job of moving guys around, right? They've put guys in different spots to give scouts an idea. All right, well, is he a tackle or is he a guard? And I'll throw some names out there. You can go whatever direction you want. Matthew Bergeron out of Syracuse has been tackle, played guard. He's done a really nice job. Cody Mock out of North Dakota State has moved all over the line, including center, by the way. I think he's done a nice job. Steve Avila out of TCU, he's played both sides at guard. He had some snaps at center yesterday. I thought he did a really nice job. So Osiris Torrance, he's played right guard and left guard. I think he's been good. So I think these guys that have shown to be versatile players that can play maybe a little bit of tackle, but maybe more both guard spots and center have really been the stars so far early in these practices.
And one guy that you left out there is Emil Ekiyor of Alabama, who's a guard who's taken the majority of his snaps at center, and he's looked really good at it. Now, I spoke with his team yesterday, and I said he's got to improve his shotgun snaps because the ball's not coming back cleanly to the quarterback at a good angle. But, I mean, he's a guy who's played guard all his career at Alabama, just recently moved to center after the season, and he's played exceptionally well. We've seen McClendon Curtis, who's played both guard spots, and he's been dominant at guard. They kicked him out to tackle. It didn't work out, but he's been fantastic at offensive guard. I think Asim Richards, the former North Carolina left tackle, has had his moments, but he's also had his struggles at guard. But yeah, I mean, you want to see that versatility to move around. You want to see what guys can and can't do, and I think we've gotten a lot of it here. I think John Michael Schmitz has solely played center, but he's done a terrific job at it. I mean, he is smart. He is strong. He is intense. You could see him quarterbacking the offensive line and making the calls. There was one play yesterday when the American team was running through the 2-minute drill where Schmitz got 25 yards downfield and just annihilated the linebacker to basically open up the lane so the wide receiver could pick up extra yards. It was a thing of beauty to watch. Yeah,
no question about it. And then before we say goodbye, Tony, I think some of the offensive tackles, kind of the straight-up guys, have done a good job as well. The right kid out of Tennessee, I think, has been pretty good. He's a guy that kind of jumped out at me. Who are some of the offensive tackles that you think have done a nice job?
Well, you got to start with DeJuan Jones, who was, I guess, basically one and done. I mean, he had a phenomenal practice on Tuesday at right tackle. Phenomenal in the sense that 6'8", 375 pounds, 36.5-inch arms. He showed much better footwork and the ability to slide and the ability to handle speed rushers than anyone would have ever thought. There's no doubt about it. And now everyone is in love with DeJuan Jones. And, understandably so, because he was that good. And it's not just he was blowing people off the ball. We know he can blow people off the ball, but it's the ability to slide off the edge and get his arms into speed rushers and shut them down.
At 6'8" and 370, by the way.
Which is what he did. So, and I guess he took his winnings and then he left because I don't think we're going to, he wasn't on the field on Wednesday. I don't think we're going to see him on Thursday. He's probably not going to play in the game. So I guess he was happy with that. I also think Jalen Duncan has done a terrific job at left tackle. And this is something we knew about Jalen Duncan. Very athletic, very mobile, terrific footwork, 6'5.5", 298 pounds, a little bit slim. 33.5-inch arms. You wish they were more towards 34 inches. They moved him to right tackle yesterday because DeJuan Jones was out. He had a couple good reps. There were times where he got run over. So you know that Jalen Duncan is specifically a left tackle, pass-blocking left tackle. He's a zone scheme type of blocker. There may be some teams that want to move him inside the guard, but, he has done so well at left tackle. I think it's a situation where you're going to put him at left tackle until he fails and proves that he can't play left tackle in the NFL. I think he has cemented himself as a day 2 selection.
Agreed. I think it's been a fun couple of days of practice. We'll have more again on the game and, of course, the Shrine Bowl game as well on our episode next week on draft season. We are right now in Tony's Airbnb. We're going to be heading out to practice shortly for Thursday, and we can cover, obviously, Thursday practice in next week's episode as well. Make sure you go to Giants.com, by the way, even if you're you remember this is a draft podcast and not a Giants podcast, but if you go to Giants.com, you have my 2 practice reports up there. Tony, where can they find your practice reports as well and everything you've been doing from the Senior Bowl?
Pro Football Network. I've got all the risers there, practice reports, all the news, which I know I got a target on my back for some of the things I've been posting, but lots of fun stuff there, and there's also some videos up there as well.
Tony's got his hoodie. He'll be incognito at practice today, so nobody finds him. It's okay. He's hiding. But again, make sure you check out all the content, and make sure you go to the Giants Huddle podcast as well. I did about 15 2 to 3 minute interviews, rapid fire with prospects at the breakfast yesterday. Make sure you go check that out in the Giants Huddle podcast if you haven't. And then on tomorrow's Giants Huddle, we'll have one of my favorites, Dane Brugler, joining me to talk about the Senior Bowl as well. So for Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. Thanks for being with us. Now, this is truly draft season.